In the unforgiving concrete jungle of a city that never sleeps, fate has a way of writing stories more incredible than fiction. Some call it chance, others call it destiny. But on one crisp autumn morning, the line between a forgotten life and an extraordinary moment would blur in ways no one could have predicted. James Carter wasn't looking to be a hero that day. He was simply trying to survive, another nameless face in a sea of urban anonymity. 25 years of military service, multiple combat tours, and a lifetime of sacrifice had led him to this moment. A man invisible to the world, yet carrying within him a warrior spirit that would soon change everything.
Little did Richard Hartley know that his carefully constructed world of wealth and power was about to collide with a force he could never have anticipated. This is a story of unexpected heroism, of a system that fails its heroes, of a moment that would redefine what it means to be truly powerful. Chapter 1. Shadows of Service. James Carter was a man shaped by service, resilience, and the quiet dignity of duty. Born into a modest family in rural Indiana, James grew up in a world where hard work was not just a value. It was a necessity. His father, a factory worker, and his mother, a school teacher, instilled in him the belief that strength was found in sacrifice and that a man's worth was defined by the lives he touched. As a boy, James idolized his grandfather, a World War II veteran who often told tales of camaraderie, bravery, and the price of freedom. Those stories sowed the seeds of James's own calling, to serve. At 18, James enlisted in the U.S. Army, a decision that would set the course of his life. Basic training revealed his natural aptitude for leadership and problem-solving under pressure. Within a few years, he climbed the ranks, proving himself in roles that demanded both courage and intellect. He was deployed to conflict zones across the globe, earning respect from his peers and commanding officers alike. Afghanistan, Iraq, and other theaters of war became the backdrop of his life, each deployment etching new lines of experience and sacrifice onto his soul. James wasn't just a soldier. He was a warrior. From leading reconnaissance missions under the cover of darkness to navigating the delicate diplomacy of rebuilding communities in war-torn regions, James embodied the ideal of a serviceman who understood that strength and compassion often walked hand in hand. Over 25 years, his uniform bore the weight of numerous medals, each one a testament to his valor and dedication. Yet, for all the accolades, it was the faces of those he had served with and the memories of those he had lost that defined his career. But the transition from military life to civilian life was anything but smooth. Retirement had been something James planned for, but nothing could prepare him for the void it created. After years of unwavering structure, clear purpose, and camaraderie, the civilian world felt alien. The skills that had made him indispensable in the military, discipline, quick decision-making, and unflinching loyalty, seemed to have little value in a society that prized networking and self-promotion. James tried to adjust. He took on security jobs at first, but they were sporadic and poorly paid. The lack of consistency made it difficult to maintain housing, and over time, his savings dwindled. A failed attempt to start his own consultancy business only drained his remaining resources further. Within a year, James found himself facing an unthinkable reality: homelessness. The descent into homelessness was not a dramatic fall, but a series of small, compounding failures. An unpaid bill here, a missed rent payment there. It all snowballed until James was left with no choice but to pack his belongings into a worn duffel bag and leave the apartment that had been his last tie to stability. He spent his first night on the streets in a haze of disbelief, clinging to his duffel as if it could anchor him to his old life. Life on the streets was a daily battle, one that tested James in ways he never imagined. The cold pavement became his bed, park benches his refuge. He quickly learned the unspoken rules of survival: which shelters were safe, which corners to avoid, and how to navigate the world of charity lines and soup kitchens. His military training kicked in. He assessed his surroundings, planned for contingencies, and kept a low profile. But the sense of isolation was crushing. Where once he had brothers in arms, he now had only fleeting interactions with strangers, many of whom looked through him as though he were invisible. Each day was a struggle to secure the basics: food, water, and a safe place to sleep. The mornings began early, often before sunrise, as shelter staff would clear the sleeping areas, sending everyone out into the cold. James would walk for hours, keeping his body moving to stave off the chill. On good days, he might find temporary work, odd jobs like unloading trucks or cleaning. The pay was meager, but it gave him a brief sense of purpose. On bad days, he scavenged for meals at soup kitchens or relied on the kindness of strangers handing out sandwiches on street corners. Despite the hardships, James carried himself with quiet dignity. He refused to beg, choosing instead to offer small services in exchange for kindness. He would help carry groceries for an elderly woman or sweep the sidewalk in front of a local diner. It wasn't much, but it allowed him to feel useful, if only for a moment. At night, James would sit beneath the stars, his thoughts consumed by the memories of his past life. He often wondered how it had come to this, how a man who had given so much to his country could be left with so little. He thought of his comrades, the men and women who had fought beside him, and of the promises made to veterans, promises that now seemed hollow. But he also thought of the people he encountered on the streets, each with their own story of loss and resilience. They reminded him that he was not alone in his struggles, even if the world seemed indifferent. What haunted James most was the loss of his identity. In the military, he had been someone, a leader, a protector, a brother. On the streets, he was just another face in the crowd, a man whose worth was measured only by his circumstances. Yet, deep inside, James held on to a fragile hope, a belief that his story was not over. He had faced insurmountable odds before, and though the battlefield was different now, the warrior within him refused to surrender. Unbeknownst to James, his darkest days were about to give way to a moment of profound transformation, a moment that would not only change his life but also ripple far beyond anything he could imagine. Chapter 2. The moment everything changed. The city awoke in a muted hum of activity, skyscrapers piercing the clouds and casting long shadows over the bustling streets below. To the untrained eye, it was a realm of endless opportunity, where ambition thrived and dreams were forged. But for those who peered deeper, the city was also a labyrinth of secrets, its polished veneer concealing a dark undercurrent of greed and desperation. For Richard Hartley, this duality was his playground and his prison. Richard's world was one of contrasts. As CEO of Hartley Global Industries, his life was a testament to success. He presided over an empire whose tendrils reached into every facet of modern existence: technology, real estate, and renewable energy. The company's headquarters was a modern monolith of glass and steel, a beacon of corporate dominance in the city's financial district. Every detail of the building screamed power, from its sleek, futuristic design to the cutting-edge security system that ensured only the most privileged could pass through its doors. Inside the towering edifice, the heartbeat of Hartley Global Industries pulsed in the rhythm of high-stakes deals and whispered strategies. Richard's office, perched on the 50th floor, was a sanctuary of luxury. The room was spacious yet deliberately sparse, its decor a study in calculated elegance. A massive glass desk sat at the center, overlooking a panoramic view of the city skyline. Behind it, the walls were adorned with abstract art, conversation pieces that subtly reminded visitors of Richard's taste and wealth. But this morning, something was different. There was an edge in the air, an unease that Richard couldn't quite place. He brushed it off as the usual weight of responsibility as he descended in his private elevator to the underground parking garage. Gregory, his longtime driver and quiet confidant, was already waiting beside the black sedan, the vehicle gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Morning, Mr. Hartley," Gregory greeted with a nod, holding the car door open. Richard gave a perfunctory nod, his focus already on his phone, scrolling through emails and updates for the day ahead. The board was set to finalize a major acquisition, one that would catapult Hartley Global into dominance in the tech sector. The stakes were high, but so were the rewards. He slid into the back seat, his thoughts consumed by calculations and contingencies. As Gregory shut the door and rounded to the driver's seat, a sound echoed through the garage, a faint scuff of a shoe against concrete. Richard glanced up from his phone, his instincts sharpening. Through the tinted windows he caught a glimpse of a figure lingering near a concrete pillar, partially shrouded in shadow. The man's posture was hesitant, his clothes disheveled. Homeless, Richard thought dismissively, already returning to his screen. But Gregory hadn't moved. His hand hovered near the ignition, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "Something's not right," he murmured. "What is it?" Richard asked, his voice edged with impatience. Before Gregory could answer, another figure stepped into view. This one was different, bigger, deliberate, his movements too controlled to be aimless. Then came a third. A chill ran down Richard's spine as he realized these men weren't loiterers. They were waiting. "Drive," Richard commanded, his voice low but firm. Gregory reached for the gear shift, but it was too late. The men moved swiftly, their plan unfolding with brutal efficiency. One of them slammed his fist against the hood of the car, while another yanked open the driver's side door, dragging Gregory out with terrifying ease. The third man circled toward the rear, pulling the door open before Richard could lock it. "Out of the car!" the man barked, his voice harsh and commanding. He brandished a weapon, compact, silenced, deadly. Richard froze, his mind racing. His world, built on control and calculated moves, had suddenly spiraled into chaos. For a fleeting moment he considered resisting, but the cold glint of the weapon dissuaded him. He stepped out, his hands raised, his heart pounding in his chest. "Keep quiet, and this will be over quick," the man hissed, grabbing Richard by the arm. His grip was iron, his intent unmistakable. The third man barked orders into a radio. "Package secured. Move to Phase 2. Richard's mind raced. Package Phase 2. This wasn't a random mugging, it was a coordinated operation. But why? What did they want from him? His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp blow to the back of his knees, forcing him to the ground. The garage, once a sterile and lifeless space, now felt like a battlefield. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows as the kidnappers worked in grim synchronization. Gregory lay unconscious near the car, his body crumpled like a discarded rag doll. And then, out of the corner of his eye, Richard saw him. The disheveled man who had first caught his attention stepped into the light. His posture was no longer hesitant. He moved with purpose, his expression steeled with resolve. For a split second, Richard thought the man might be part of the operation. But then he saw it, the glint of something primal, something unyielding in the man's eyes. The kidnappers hadn't noticed him yet, their focus entirely on subduing Richard. The disheveled man who looked like he'd stepped out of the city's forgotten alleys suddenly erupted into motion. His movements were swift and precise, each step a calculated strike. The first kidnapper fell before he could react, his weapon clattering to the ground as the man struck with the force of a hammer. The second spun around, only to be met with a brutal kick that sent him crashing into the side of the car. By the time the third kidnapper raised his weapon, the man was already upon him, disarming him with a series of fluid, almost surgical motions. Richard watched in stunned silence as the scene unfolded. It was over in seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When the dust settled, the three kidnappers lay incapacitated on the ground, groaning in pain. The disheveled man stood over them, his breathing steady, his eyes scanning the scene for any remaining threats. "Are you hurt?" the man asked, his voice calm but firm as he turned to Richard. Richard struggled to find his voice. Who are you?" The man didn't answer immediately. He crouched down, collecting the weapons and tossing them out of reach before checking Gregory's pulse. Satisfied that the driver was still alive, he finally looked up. "James," he said simply. "James Carter." It was a name that carried no weight in Richard's world, but there was something about the way James said it, unassuming yet unyielding, that left an impression. This man, who looked like he belonged to the city's forgotten, had just saved Richard's life with the precision of a trained operative. "Why?" Richard began, but James cut him off. "No time for questions. We need to get you out of here now." Richard hesitated. He was used to giving orders, not taking them. But the urgency in James's voice left no room for debate. Together, they hauled Gregory into the back seat of the sedan. James slid into the driver's seat, his movements deliberate yet swift. Within seconds, they were speeding out of the garage, leaving the chaos behind. As they merged into traffic, Richard's mind raced with questions. Who were the men who had tried to take him? What did they want? And who was James Carter, this enigmatic figure who had emerged from the shadows to save him? But as the city blurred past the windows, one thing was clear. This was no ordinary day. This was the moment everything changed. Chapter 3. Unraveling the Conspiracy. The car sped through the city streets, its engine humming with urgency. Richard Hartley sat in the back seat, his mind a storm of unanswered questions. The man in the driver's seat, James Carter, the homeless stranger who had saved his life, drove with the focus of someone who had navigated far more dangerous terrain than rush-hour traffic. The silence between them was heavy, punctuated only by the sound of tires skimming asphalt and Gregory's shallow breathing as he lay unconscious beside Richard. It wasn't until they reached a quieter stretch of road away from the looming skyscrapers that Richard spoke. "I need answers," he demanded, his voice a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Who were those men? Why did they target me? And why did you, of all people, step in?" James glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. "I don't have all the answers," he replied evenly, "but I know this wasn't random. Those men were professionals, too coordinated, too precise. Someone wanted you alive, not dead. That means they need something from you." The words sent a chill down Richard's spine. As a billionaire CEO, he was no stranger to threats. Lawsuits, disgruntled former employees, and the occasional smear campaign were part of the territory. But this was different. This was personal. "Why should I trust you?" Richard asked, narrowing his eyes. "You don't have to," James said, his voice calm but firm. "But I've seen situations like this before. If you want to survive, you'll need someone who knows how these people think." Richard considered this. Trust wasn't something he gave freely, but the truth was undeniable. James had saved his life, and his instincts were razor-sharp. Reluctantly, he nodded. "Fine. But we start with answers." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Richard insisted on returning to Hartley Global Industries, despite James's warning that it might not be safe. "I have resources there," Richard argued. "If someone's behind this, we'll find out who." Inside the skyscraper, the atmosphere was tense. News of the attack hadn't reached the public yet, but whispers had already begun circulating among the staff. Richard's executive assistant, Lydia, greeted him at the private elevator with a look of barely contained panic. "Mr. Hartley, are you all right?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm fine," Richard replied brusquely, brushing past her. "Get security and legal up to my office. Now." Minutes later, Richard, James, and a small team of his most trusted advisors convened in his expansive office. The room, usually a haven of control and order, now felt stifling. On the large screen mounted on the wall, the building's head of security, a former intelligence operative named Marcus Holt, began presenting his findings. "The attackers bypassed multiple layers of security," Marcus explained, his tone grave. "They knew the layout of the parking garage and the timing of your schedule. This wasn't a random act. It was an inside job. An audible gasp rippled through the room. Richard's jaw tightened as he processed the revelation. "Are you saying someone in this building betrayed me?" "It's possible," Marcus admitted. "Or someone close to you leaked information. Either way, this was carefully planned." James, who had been listening silently until now, stepped forward. "What about the men themselves?" he asked. "Have you identified them?" Marcus hesitated. Two of them had clean records. No IDs, no prints in any system. But the third, he was flagged in an international database. Former mercenary. Worked for a private military contractor that went bankrupt 5 years ago. "And the contractor?" James pressed. "Linked to multiple high-profile incidents," Marcus replied. "Corporate sabotage, political kidnappings. They weren't picky about their clients, as long as the money was good." Richard's stomach churned. Whoever was behind this had resources and connections far beyond a disgruntled employee. This was a calculated move, one designed to destabilize him, and possibly more. As the investigation deepened, connections began to emerge. James, with his background in military strategy, quickly became an invaluable asset, offering insights that even Marcus hadn't considered. Together, they pieced together fragments of evidence, uncovering a trail that led to a shadowy figure. Victor Dane, a former rival of Richard's who had disappeared from the public eye years ago. Victor had been a rising star in the corporate world, once touted as the next Richard Hartley, but a failed merger orchestrated by Hartley Global Industries had destroyed his company, leaving him bankrupt and disgraced. The media had painted Victor as a cautionary tale of hubris, but Richard knew better. Victor was ruthless, cunning, and vengeful. A man who didn't just get even, he obliterated his enemies. "It can't be a coincidence," Richard muttered, staring at Victor's name on the screen. "He's been lying in wait all this time." "Revenge doesn't expire," James said grimly. "It festers." But as they dug deeper, a more unsettling truth began to surface. The attack wasn't just about Richard, it was about Hartley Global Industries as a whole. Financial records, internal memos, and surveillance data revealed a coordinated effort to undermine the company's operations. Key personnel had been bribed or blackmailed, sensitive information leaked, and critical projects sabotaged. "This is bigger than Victor," Marcus said, his voice laced with unease. "He's just a piece of the puzzle." The puzzle grew even more complex when James uncovered a connection between Victor and a shell company tied to Hartley Global's energy division. The company, Green Axis Ventures, had been a silent partner in one of Hartley Global's renewable energy projects. On paper, it looked legitimate, but further scrutiny revealed it to be a front, one used to siphon funds and funnel them into offshore accounts. "This isn't just sabotage," James said, his tone sharp. "This is a hostile takeover in disguise." Richard's blood ran cold. His life's work, the empire he had built from the ground up, was under siege. But as the pieces began to fall into place, another revelation shook him to his core. The roots of the conspiracy stretched back further than he could have imagined, to his own past. In the early days of Hartley Global Industries, Richard had made a series of aggressive moves to secure the company's position. One of those moves had been a merger with a smaller tech firm, Innovatech Solutions. The deal had been lucrative, but it had come at a cost. Innovatech's founder, Daniel Carter, had been forced out, his patents absorbed into Hartley Global's portfolio. Daniel Carter was James's father. The discovery hit James like a gut punch. He hadn't known the full details of his father's downfall, only that it had led to financial ruin and eventually to his father's death. To learn that the man he had just saved was responsible for it ignited a storm of emotions. Anger, betrayal, and a deep sense of injustice. Richard, for his part, was equally shaken. He had no memory of Daniel Carter or the specifics of the merger. It had been just another deal in a career filled with them. But James's presence brought the human cost of his decisions into sharp focus. "I didn't know," Richard said quietly, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "That doesn't change what happened," James replied, his tone cold. "You destroyed my family." The tension between them was palpable, threatening to derail their fragile alliance. But as much as James wanted to walk away, he couldn't ignore the larger threat. The conspiracy wasn't just about Richard. It was about dismantling a system that had failed countless people, himself included. "This isn't just your fight," James said finally, his voice steady but firm. "If we don't stop them, they'll do this to someone else, someone who doesn't have the resources to fight back." Richard nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. For the first time, he saw James not as a stranger, but as an equal, a man whose strength came from a lifetime of battles, both seen and unseen. As the hours turned into days, the investigation reached a fever pitch. Every thread they pulled unraveled a deeper layer of the conspiracy, revealing a network of corruption and greed that extended far beyond Hartley Global. Victor Dane was just the face of it. The true mastermind remained hidden, a phantom pulling strings from the shadows. But even as they closed in on the truth, the danger escalated. A break-in at the Hartley Global offices left 2 security guards injured and key evidence destroyed. James, ever vigilant, began to suspect that their every move was being watched. "We're running out of time," he warned. "Whoever's behind this knows we're onto them." Despite the mounting pressure, Richard refused to back down. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond profit margins and quarterly earnings. This wasn't just about saving his company, it was about redemption. The final piece of the puzzle came in the form of a recorded conversation, retrieved from a corrupted hard drive. The voice on the recording belonged to none other than Claire Monroe, Hartley Global's COO. "Dane's not your concern," Claire said in the recording, her tone icy. "Focus on securing the assets. Hartley won't know what hit him until it's too late." The betrayal cut deep. Claire had been Richard's confidant, his right hand. To learn that she had been orchestrating his downfall was a blow he hadn't anticipated. As the realization sank in, Richard turned to James, his expression grim but resolute. "We take her down. We take all of them down." James nodded. "Let's finish this." And with that, the stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the conspiracy and redefine both their lives forever. Chapter 4. Redemption and Transformation. The events that unfolded in the days after the conspiracy's unraveling were nothing short of transformative. For Richard Hartley and James Carter, life would never be the same again. What began as a harrowing attempt on Richard's life had evolved into a journey of redemption, systemic change, and a renewed sense of purpose that neither man had anticipated. The conspiracy, once shrouded in darkness, was now fully exposed. The media descended upon the story like vultures, dissecting every sordid detail. Hartley Global Industries, once a symbol of corporate dominance, became the epicenter of a scandal that rocked the business world. Headlines screamed of betrayal, greed, and corruption, with Claire Monroe's name leading the charge. Arrested and charged with embezzlement and conspiracy, Claire became the face of the betrayal that had threatened to dismantle Hartley Global. But amidst the chaos, a different narrative began to emerge, a story of heroism, resilience, and the unlikely alliance between a billionaire CEO and a homeless veteran. Public recognition. James Carter had never sought the spotlight. For years he had lived in the shadows, surviving day by day, his contributions to society largely forgotten. But now, his name was on everyone's lips. The man who had saved Richard Hartley and helped expose a sprawling conspiracy was hailed as a hero. News outlets scrambled for interviews, and social media buzzed with hashtags celebrating his bravery. At first, James was reluctant to step into the limelight. He had spent so long being invisible that the sudden attention felt overwhelming. But Richard, recognizing the importance of James's story, encouraged him to embrace the moment. "You deserve to be seen," Richard said one evening as they prepared for a joint press conference. "Your story matters, It's time the world knows what men like you have sacrificed and what they continue to endure. The press conference was held in the grand atrium of Hartley Global's headquarters, now heavily guarded and swarming with reporters. Richard and James stood side by side, their contrasting appearances a poignant reminder of the disparity between their worlds. Cameras flashed as Richard stepped forward to speak. "Today," Richard began, his voice steady but emotional, "we acknowledge the courage of one man who stood up against incredible odds, not just to save my life but to uncover the truth. James Carter is a hero, but more than that, he represents countless veterans who have given everything for their country, only to be forgotten when they return home. That ends today." The room erupted in applause as James stepped forward. His voice, though hesitant at first, carried the weight of his experiences. "I didn't do this for recognition," he said. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. But if my story can shine a light on the struggles of veterans like me, on the system that so often fails us, then I'll use this moment to demand change." Veteran Support Initiative. Inspired by James's story, Richard took immediate action. He announced the creation of the Hartley Veteran Support Initiative, HVSI, a comprehensive program aimed at addressing the systemic issues faced by veterans. The initiative was ambitious, encompassing everything from housing and health care to job training and mental health services. The cornerstone of HVSI was the construction of transitional housing facilities for homeless veterans. Partnering with architects and urban planners, Richard pledged to repurpose several unused properties owned by Hartley Global into state-of-the-art community centers. Each facility would provide not just shelter but also access to counselors, job placement programs, and medical care. James, now a key advisor for HVSI, played a central role in shaping the program. "It's not just about giving veterans a roof over their heads," he insisted during one planning meeting. "It's about giving them a path forward, a chance to rebuild their lives with dignity." The first center, named the Carter House in James's honor, opened within months. The grand opening was a celebration of hope and resilience, attended by veterans, community leaders, and even a few high-profile politicians. James, addressing the crowd, spoke of his journey from the streets to this moment. "This isn't just a building," he said. "It's a second chance, for me, for others like me, and for a society that needs to do better by its heroes." The impact of HVSI was immediate and profound. Within a year, hundreds of veterans had transitioned from homelessness to stable employment, their lives transformed by the opportunities the program provided. But Richard knew this was just the beginning. Systemic change. While HVSI addressed immediate needs, Richard and James recognized the deeper systemic issues that perpetuated the struggles of veterans. They began advocating for legislative reforms, working closely with policymakers to push for changes in how veterans' benefits were managed and distributed. One of their first victories was the passage of the Veterans Recovery and Empowerment Act, a sweeping piece of legislation that streamlined access to benefits, increased funding for mental health programs, and established new accountability measures for government agencies tasked with supporting veterans. Richard used his influence and resources to ensure the bill's success, but it was James who became its most powerful advocate. His testimony before Congress was a turning point, his raw and personal account of life as a homeless veteran cutting through political divisions. "We were willing to die for this country," James said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "The least this country can do is help us live when we come home." The legislation marked a watershed moment, but Richard and James didn't stop there. They launched a nationwide awareness campaign, partnering with nonprofits, corporations, and media outlets to highlight the challenges faced by veterans. The campaign, titled "Invisible No More," featured stories from veterans across the country, shining a light on their resilience and calling on society to do better. Personal transformation. For Richard, the journey was more than just a professional endeavor. It was deeply personal. The events of the past months had forced him to confront his own complicity in the system he now sought to change. He had spent decades building an empire, often at the expense of others, and the realization weighed heavily on him. But working alongside James, seeing the world through his eyes, had sparked a transformation. Richard began reevaluating his priorities, questioning the values that had driven him for so long. The man who once measured success in profits and market share now found fulfillment in making a tangible difference. James, too, underwent a transformation. For years, he had carried the weight of his past, his father's downfall, his own struggles with homelessness, and the invisible scars of war. But through his work with HVSI and his newfound role as an advocate, James found a renewed sense of purpose. He reconnected with his estranged siblings who had thought him lost to the streets and began rebuilding those relationships. He also sought help for his own trauma, recognizing that healing was an ongoing process. "It's not easy," he admitted to a group of veterans during a support session, "but if I've learned anything, it's that we're stronger together. We fought battles before. We can fight this one, too." Their bond, Richard and James's, deepened as well. Though they came from vastly different worlds, their shared experiences had forged a unique friendship. They often reflected on the strange series of events that had brought them together, marveling at how their lives had intertwined in such unexpected ways. "You know," James said one evening as they walked through the halls of the Carter house, "if someone told me a year ago that I'd be working with a billionaire to change the world, I'd have called them crazy." Richard chuckled. "And if someone told me a homeless veteran would save my life and teach me what really matters, I'd have said the same." A legacy of change. By the end of that first year, the impact of their work was undeniable. Hartley Global Industries had not only recovered from the scandal, but had also emerged as a leader in corporate social responsibility. Investors, once wary, were now lauding Richard's vision and the company's renewed focus on ethical practices. But for Richard and James, the greatest success wasn't measured in stock prices or headlines. It was in the faces of the veterans whose lives had been changed, the families reunited, and the communities strengthened by their efforts. Their journey was far from over. There were still battles to be fought, systems to be reformed, and lives to be saved. But for the first time, both men felt they were on the right path. A path defined not by wealth or status, but by purpose and compassion. In the end, their story wasn't just one of redemption or transformation. It was a testament to the power of unlikely alliances and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Together, they had proven that even in a world divided by privilege and adversity, change was possible. And in doing so, they had found a legacy worth leaving behind. In a world that often overlooks its heroes, James Carter reminded us that true valor isn't about medals or recognition. It's about integrity, courage, and the unexpected moments that define our humanity. Richard Hartley learned that wealth cannot shield you from life's most profound lessons. A man with nothing can still have everything that truly matters: honor, skill, and the courage to stand up when no one else will. This is more than just a story of a homeless veteran and a billionaire. This is a testament to the invisible heroes walking among us, the ones society has forgotten, but who never forget who they are. Sometimes, the most extraordinary transformations begin with a single, unexpected moment of courage. And as for James Carter, he proved that a hero's worth is not measured by their circumstances, but by the moment they choose to act.